I knew they were gone before I even saw the note. The house was too clean, too quiet. The kind of quiet that tells you love has left the room. For years. I, Darlene Cooper, told myself that family meant forgiveness. I covered for them, smiled through their sharp words, convinced that patience would someday make me enough. But it never did. Every time I stood up, they found a way to make me kneel again. This morning, on the day that was supposed to belong to all of us, they left. My sister took them. She took my parents. Their approval, and the last illusion that I still mattered to any of them. I stared at her handwriting on that folded paper, mocking, effortless, final, and something in me went very still. Not broken, not angry, just still, like the moment before a storm decides which way it will turn. I'm done waiting for their love to feel like love, and they have no idea what's coming next. Morning came soft and pale, the kind of Seattle light that makes the air look like glass. A thin mist slid across the windows, and the sound of rain tapped gently on the roof, steady and calm. It should have been comforting, but the silence beneath it felt wrong. Too still, too deliberate, like the world had taken a breath and decided not to let it go. I sat up slowly, listening. No footsteps upstairs, no humming from the kitchen, no smell of coffee drifting through the air. It was strange how a house could feel so clean, so organized, and yet so utterly abandoned. The quiet pressed against my chest like weight. I walked downstairs, barefoot against the cool wood floor. The kitchen was spotless, the counters wiped down, the chairs pushed neatly under the table. Everything in its place. Too perfect. On the table sat a single white envelope with my name written on it. My stomach turned before my hands even touched it. The handwriting curved in the way I knew by heart. Graceful, practiced. The kind of neatness that always seemed designed to be admired. April's handwriting. She had always loved looking composed, even when she was lying. Inside the envelope was a folded sheet of paper and 3 airline tickets. The scent of fresh ink clung to the note, sharp and new, as if it had been written only moments before they left. We're off to Paris. You'll be fine. You always are. I read it once, then again. Then I stared at the tickets until the words blurred. 3 seats, same flight, same hotel, under my mother's name. The edges of the paper trembled between my fingers, but my body didn't move. My heart hit once, hard, then quieted like it had been told to stand down. I didn't feel shock. Shock is loud. It demands reaction. This was quieter, a realization that settled deep, like frost under skin. This time, they hadn't forgotten me. They had chosen to leave, and not just to leave, but to make sure I knew it. Light seeped in through the tall kitchen window, falling across the counter, glinting off the metal band of my old military watch, the same watch that had measured flight paths, mission countdowns, and the hours I spent waiting for planes that never came back. Today, it was marking something else. The minute my family decided they were finally done pretending, I placed the note carefully into the drawer beside the stove. Not to save it, just to contain it. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, sharp and sterile. I poured a half cup of coffee from the pot that had gone cold overnight. My hands shook as I lifted it, not from sadness, but from restraint. Across the room, hanging beside the hall mirror, was my wedding dress. White silk, simple, elegant. Next to it, my old blue uniform hung in its plastic cover, pressed and perfect, 2 halves of a life that had never quite fit together. The soldier and the bride, duty and love. I walked over and touched the uniform first, tracing the seam at the shoulder, where the stitching was just slightly uneven. My hands work. Then I reached for the dress. The fabric was softer than I remembered, light and fragile. A thing meant for celebration, not survival. For a long moment, I just stood there between them. Then I let my hand fall to the dress. The rain picked up outside, the rhythm steady, almost like a drumbeat. I heard myself whisper, calm, almost clinical, the way I used to speak into a radio headset before a storm run. I've handled turbulence before. This is just another flight. It wasn't comfort, it was command. There was no reason to cry. No one left to hear it if I did. The emotion was there, just buried deep under something firmer, something colder. They'd made their choice, and now I had mine. I rinsed the coffee mug, wiped the counter again, then picked up the small bouquet of white roses waiting by the sink. I'd arranged them the night before, tying them with a blue ribbon that matched the sky when it wasn't raining. The front door clicked as I turned the lock. The sound echoed through the house, hollow and final. I paused for a second, looking back at the clean, silent kitchen, the empty chairs, the drawer with the letter, the neatness that hid the cruelty. Outside, the sky was washed in gray, layered clouds moving low and fast over the bay. Somewhere out there, above the clouds, a plane was probably heading east. Maybe theirs, maybe not. It didn't matter. I stepped out, roses in hand, heels clicking softly against the wet pavement. The cold air bit at my throat, but I drew it in anyway, slow and deliberate. It tasted like rain and metal, and something faintly electric, like the edge of change. For a second, I imagined their laughter echoing in some Paris cafe, the sound of glasses clinking, the same easy charm that had always convinced everyone else they were perfect. Maybe they thought I'd break. Maybe they wanted me to. But breaking takes sound, and I'd already learned how to be silent. I looked up at the sky, gray fading to silver, planes disappearing into the mist, and felt the first hint of a smile tug at the corner of my mouth. Not bitterness, not pride, just the strange, quiet certainty that this was no longer their story to write. The world was still raining when I walked toward my car, bouquet steady in my hand. Behind me, the door closed with a soft click, sealing the house in its own emptiness. They were already halfway to Paris, and I was already halfway to becoming someone they wouldn't recognize. The wipers scraped a slow rhythm across the windshield as I drove through the morning drizzle. The sound steady enough to quiet my thoughts, but not to erase them. The air smelled of wet asphalt and salt from the sound, and each turn of the wheels felt heavier than the last. Seattle's gray sky blended with the road until everything looked like a single sheet of metal stretching ahead. The drive should have taken 20 minutes, but memory has a way of lengthening miles. Somewhere between the bridge and the turnoff to the ferry terminal, the rain turned my reflection on the glass into someone I barely recognized. For a second, I could almost see the Texas sun flashing behind it. Hot, unkind, the light of another world. That's where April and I grew up. Flat land, open sky, and a house that never knew what peace sounded like. She was all warmth and charm, the golden child everyone wanted to be around. And me, I was the quiet one who kept things running. I used to think it was balance, not favoritism. But years have a way of showing you the truth in slow motion. She was sunshine. I was the storm. I can still remember the day the base commander called me in. His office smelled like jet fuel and burnt coffee. The kind of mix you never forget once it's tied to humiliation. He told me there'd been an anonymous report about me mishandling classified schematics. I laughed at first, thought it was a mistake, until they showed me the email. A single line buried deep in the metadata, a signature of the device used to send it. The same IP address as the laptop I'd given April for her design classes. When they told me, I couldn't even speak. I walked out into the hangar and stood there until the alarms for the night shift started ringing. My career survived, but something else didn't. I told my parents. My father looked away. My mother's hands twisted the hem of her sweater as she said it like a prayer. She's impulsive, Darlene. Don't ruin her life over a mistake. A mistake. That's what they called a betrayal that nearly cost me everything I had worked for. The words sank deeper than any reprimand ever could. After that, I learned to be silent, not because I forgave her, but because arguing in that house only proved what they already believed, that I was the difficult one. I drove through the mist and could almost hear their voices again. My mother's soothing tone, always meant to smooth over whatever April had broken. My father's sigh, long and tired, as if my disappointment in them was just another inconvenience to be managed. It's strange how a person can survive war zones, yet still flinch at the sound of their own family's disapproval. The ferry signs appeared ahead. I slowed at the intersection, the tires hissing against the wet pavement. Rain streaked the window like old film scratches, turning the city into something distant and unkind. Another memory rose, sharper than the rest. Christmas Eve, 2020. The base was freezing that winter, and I'd sent my deployment bonus home. Enough for them to replace the washing machine that had been broken for months. I remember calling to make sure it arrived. My mother had thanked me, soft and distracted. 2 weeks later, when I finally took leave and drove back, there was a used car parked in the driveway. April was leaning on it, smiling like a movie star. She said she bought it herself. My mother smiled the same soft smile she always did and told me, "Your sister needed it more." That was the first time I realized it out loud. In our family, I wasn't the daughter. I was the resource. Money, time, forgiveness. Everything flowed one way, from me to them. The fairy horn sounded in the distance, low and mournful, pulling me back into the present. I blinked, the fog of memory fading as Bainbridge's terminal lights came into view ahead. I pulled the truck into line, rain still whispering on the roof. Steam curled from my breath as I leaned back against the seat. My hands rested on the steering wheel, but I wasn't gripping it anymore. April had taken plenty from me, my reputation, my peace, my sense of belonging. She'd stolen versions of me, one after another, until I almost forgot who I was beneath the quiet. But this day, this single, fragile morning that belonged to me, she wouldn't have. The rain eased, the first break in the gray sky, opening like a wound that didn't hurt anymore. Light slipped through the clouds, pale and clean, spilling over the hood of the truck. I stared through the windshield at that line of brightness cutting across the water. She took my past. She won't take my day. The fairy horn sounded again, deeper this time, calling me forward. I turned the key, and the engine answered with a steady growl. The wheels rolled toward the waiting dock, and with every foot of movement, the noise of the world grew fainter behind me, until there was only the road, the rain, and the quiet strength of finally choosing not to look back. The house greeted me with the same kind of silence that lingers after a funeral, thick, careful, almost polite. Curtains swayed gently in the draft from the half-open window, the faint hiss of rain fading into wind. Everything was neat, untouched, like a place someone had already said goodbye to. I dropped my keys onto the counter and stood there for a moment, listening to the soft creak of the walls. The wedding dress still hung in the corner where I'd left it that morning, a pale ghost against the dark wood. The air carried a hint of coffee and detergent, and underneath it, the emptiness of a home that had stopped belonging to anyone. Then the front door opened, and the world filled with motion again. Rosa Hill stepped inside, hair dripping from the rain, leather jacket streaked with water, eyes sharp as ever. She shut the door behind her, tossed her gloves onto a chair, and studied me like she was assessing a battlefield. "You look like you're about to cancel the war," she said, voice flat but warm underneath. "They left," I answered, barely louder than a whisper. "Good," she said, less dead weight. There was no pity in her tone, thank God for that. Rosa had never been the kind to comfort with softness. She was a former Air Force lieutenant, the kind of woman who could rebuild an engine or a person if she decided they were worth saving. Years ago, she had dragged me out of a hospital cot after a crash exercise went wrong and told me to either walk again or die standing. Since then, she'd been the one person who never treated my silence like weakness. She kicked off her boots and crossed the room with the precision of someone who still thought in formation. With one quick motion, she turned on the lights, flipped open her phone, and let an old country song fill the air. The kind of tune that smelled of whiskey and dust, rough, honest, alive. "Mission today," she said, laying her bag on the table. "Survive, look stunning, and make them irrelevant." I couldn't help but laugh, and the sound startled me. It had been so long since laughter hadn't felt like a mask. We moved through the small rituals of preparation. Rosa pulled out a hairbrush and makeup kit like she was setting up for field maintenance. She hummed along with the music, her reflection behind me in the mirror, focused, unflinching. For the first time that day, I felt something other than the ache of betrayal. Purpose, maybe. The muscle memory of getting ready for a mission. The quiet before stepping into chaos. As she curled my hair, my phone lit up on the counter. I caught the glow from the corner of my eye and felt a chill run through me. I knew that number too well. April. The message sat there, bright against the dark screen. "Don't embarrass yourself. Nathaniel will thank us later." It felt like a blade pressed flat against my skin. Cold, measured, personal. I didn't touch the phone. My throat tightened, but the rest of me stayed still. Years in uniform had taught me that stillness could be armor. Rosa noticed. She stopped mid-stroke, her eyes narrowing. She texted you? Yeah. Then she's watching, Rosa said, her voice dropping low. Let her. I didn't reply. I didn't even delete it. I just turned the phone face down and slid it aside, like placing a loaded weapon out of reach. Rosa said nothing more. She knew me well enough to leave the silence intact. We finished in quiet, the song on the radio fading into static before another one began. On the table beside me lay my watch, military issue, its glass slightly scratched from a mission I never talked about. Next to it rested the wedding ring, small and gleaming, waiting to be claimed. Time and commitment, duty and devotion. Two worlds that had always demanded everything I had and given little back in return. I stared at them, feeling the weight of what they represented. One side of my life had already been tested and survived. The other was about to begin, if I let it. For a moment, I thought about April's words again. How quickly she reached for cruelty when she wanted control. How familiar it felt. Every insult she had ever thrown at me came wrapped in something that sounded like advice. Every time she'd hurt me, she'd done it with a smile that dared me to react. Not this time. Rosa clipped the last strand of hair into place and stepped back, assessing her work with a nod. The reflection staring back at me didn't look broken. It looked composed, maybe even defiant. She said, "You've been standing alone all your life. Today, do it beautifully." I turned to face her, feeling the steadiness return to my voice. "Copy that, Lieutenant." She grinned, just a flicker of teeth, then turned away to pack up her things. The air between us filled with the faint hum of the last song on the radio. I walked to the window, outside. The rain had finally stopped. The sky had cracked open just enough for light to slip through, a soft, silver hue spreading over the wet rooftops. For a second, the whole city seemed to hold its breath. I reached for the bouquet resting by the sill, the scent of lilies mixing with the cold air sneaking in through the cracked glass. My reflection in the window was faint but steady, hair pinned, eyes forward, dress waiting. I wasn't sure what kind of day it would be, only that it would be mine. Behind me, Rosa's voice carried through the quiet. "Time to move out, Captain." I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't ask for luck. The last of the clouds pulled apart above the skyline, and a single beam of light found the mirror, glancing off the edge of the wedding ring on the table. I picked it up, turning it once between my fingers before slipping it into my pocket. Outside, the wind shifted. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang, steady and low, like a countdown I didn't need to fear. I took one last look at the empty house, the ghost of a family that had already left, and whispered under my breath, "You took enough. This. You won't have." Then I opened the door to the bright, pale light of Seattle, stepped out, and let the silence close behind me like the end of an old chapter. Seattle was waking under a thin veil of fog, the kind that made the skyline look half-drawn, like the city wasn't sure if it wanted to appear yet. The ferry rocked gently beneath our feet, pushing through the gray water toward Bainbridge Island. The air was damp with salt, quiet except for the hum of the engine and the occasional cry of a gull. Rosa stood beside me, hands in her pockets, eyes scanning the distance like she was still on a mission. The sound stretched endlessly in front of us, its surface smooth as steel. Still water doesn't mean no storm underneath, I whispered to myself, watching my reflection tremble in the ferry window. My face looked calm, but the kind of calm that comes before a drop. Behind me, Rosa checked her watch, her tone even. "You're sure about this?" she asked. "As sure as I've ever been," I said, which wasn't much, but that had never stopped me before. When we docked, the first thing I saw was color. The pale green of the island trees, the bright whites of the tents, the silver ribbons of the aisle flapping in the wind. Everything looked picture perfect, the kind of beauty that comes with planning and money. Yet underneath, I could feel the tension humming like power lines. The garden overlooked the bay, rows of white chairs facing a wooden arch laced with lilies and eucalyptus. Nathaniel's team had done well. Every detail was exquisite. Every face that turned toward me was polite, smiling, curious. But curiosity always hides judgment if you look close enough. People whispered as they took their seats. The air itself seemed to lean closer to listen. Her family didn't come? Someone murmured behind me. I heard she used to be in the Air Force. Another voice answered. Maybe they didn't approve. Each sentence landed like a small stone dropped into still water, spreading ripples that reached me no matter how far I stood. I didn't flinch. I'd been trained not to. Rosa lingered a few steps back, her voice a low anchor against the wind. Hold formation, eyes forward. I straightened my shoulders. Chin up, posture perfect. The murmurs could travel as far as they wanted. They'd never touch me. The band began tuning near the edge of the lawn, violins and cellos stretching notes into the mist. Guests greeted Nathaniel as he arrived, shaking hands, taking photos. I kept my distance, letting him work through the crowd. My palms itched, a subtle reminder that control sometimes feels exactly like pressure. Then I caught sight of the Seattle Herald reporter moving between guests. Young, sharp, too eager. He spotted me and came over, notebook ready, microphone half hidden behind his scarf. Ms. Cooper, he said quietly, any comments about your parents' absence today? We received an anonymous tip this morning. That phrase, anonymous tip, hit a nerve I didn't know was still exposed. My pulse ticked once in my neck. Anonymous meant family. It always did. I smiled just enough for the cameras that might be nearby. My family's watching from afar. That's all that matters. Before he could reply, I turned and walked away, my heels steady against the brick path. He called after me once, but I didn't break stride. Behind me, I could feel Rose's pride like a hand on my back, silent, solid. Inside the garden tent, Nathaniel stood with two members of his PR team. Their tablets glowed faintly in the low light, reflecting against his suit. When he turned to look at me, his expression softened, but something behind his eyes flickered, controlled, cautious. Press already knows? I asked, keeping my voice low. He hesitated, long enough to make me notice. It'll be fine, he said finally. You'll see. He meant to reassure me, but reassurance that vague always hides something. The air between us thickened with what wasn't said. Still, I nodded. There were more important things to do than chase ghosts before walking down an aisle. Rosa slipped in, brushing the rain from her jacket. She gave me that look that meant she'd been reading too much too fast. Her phone buzzed in her hand, lighting up her face with a cold glow. You're not gonna like this, she muttered. Your sister posted again. My stomach sank even before I asked, what did she say? Rosa squinted at the screen. Caption reads, Guess who's walking alone today? A quiet laugh escaped me before I could stop it. It wasn't humor, it was recognition. The kind of laugh that comes when a pattern finally stops hurting because it's too predictable. Let her, I said. She's watching from her bubble. Rosa looked up from her phone, eyes steady on mine. Yeah, she said. But today, you own the sky. Outside, a commercial plane groaned overhead, its engines cutting through the thick clouds. The timing was perfect, too perfect. We both looked up, following its trail until it disappeared into the fog. The moment passed, but the weight of it stayed. Every whisper, every headline, every shadow of April's interference built into a pressure I could almost feel vibrating under my ribs. Guests continued to arrive, smiling and adjusting their umbrellas. Their conversations polite on the surface and poisonous underneath. Some of Nathaniel's colleagues nodded toward me with a mix of sympathy and fascination. The way people look at a story they're not sure they believe yet. The rain had stopped completely by the time I walked out to the garden. The air smelled of wet earth and lilies. A light breeze moved through the rows of chairs, carrying fragments of conversation. I caught words like alone, brave, strange. I let them all pass through me, collecting nothing. Rosa followed close behind, keeping to the shadows like a soldier on patrol. She knew I didn't need protection, only presence. As I reached the edge of the aisle, the violinist began a soft prelude, the first chord stretching like a held breath. I exhaled slowly, grounding myself in the rhythm of the sound. It wasn't peace, exactly, but it was control. And control, for me, had always been enough. Somewhere across the bay, my sister might have been watching a live stream or scrolling through her feed, waiting for me to falter, waiting to see cracks. She'd have to wait a long time. The sun began to break through the thinning clouds, scattering light across the water until the bay shimmered like glass. The guests turned toward the aisle, murmurs fading to hush. In that suspended silence, I caught my reflection again, this time in the polished glass of a patio door near the archway. A woman in white, standing tall, eyes calm, every line of her body drawn tight between defiance and grace. For the first time that morning, I felt ready. The fairy, the whispers, the anonymous tips, they were all just noise. Beneath it, something steady remained. The still water was holding. Yes, but I could feel the storm gathering underneath, and this time, it was mine to command. The lace along the hem of my dress caught a sliver of light as I adjusted it, the fabric whispering against the floor. Seattle's pale daylight filtered through the high windows, painting everything in muted silver. On my wrist, under the sleeve of white silk, the edge of my military watch gleamed faintly. I had never taken it off, not for ceremonies, not for parties, not even for this day. It was a habit, or maybe a promise to myself, that no matter what new title I wore, some part of me would always belong to discipline. The room was still, humming with the distant murmur of guests outside. I could hear faint laughter and the creak of chairs settling into the lawn. Someone was testing a microphone, voice breaking and restarting, followed by the low rumble of the wind from the bay. Then the door opened without a knock. Nathaniel stepped in, his suit perfectly pressed, the dark navy fabric cutting sharp lines against the white of the room. His tie was already loosened, a small betrayal of composure. The air around him shifted, carrying the scent of rain and something heavier. Hesitation. "Is this part of the schedule?" I asked, not looking away from the mirror. He exhaled slowly. "I need to tell you something before we walk out there." The way he said it made my chest tighten, not because I feared what came next, but because I'd heard that tone before, in briefing rooms, right before the mission changed. I turned toward him, hands steady even though I felt the pulse in my neck quicken. "April came to see me last week," he said. For a moment, the room stopped breathing. My reflection behind him froze. A ghost caught mid-thought. "She what?" "She told me you were marrying me for money, that you planned to quit your job right after." The words landed softly, but their echo filled every corner of the room. My fingers twitched against the lace of my dress, the motion small but sharp enough to break through the numbness. "And you believed her?" "Not for a second." He closed the distance between us, his voice lower now, steady. "I've seen how you work, Darlene. I've seen how you talk about engines like they're alive, how you touch a design like it's something breathing. You're not here for money. You're here because you build things that fly, including us." I met his eyes, and something inside me shifted, not softened, but settled. April would never understand this kind of respect, the kind that didn't need to be spoken to exist. Nathaniel ran a hand through his hair, the tension easing just slightly. Then his expression changed again, something almost like guilt flickering behind it. "There's something else." He glanced toward the window, where the curtains fluttered with the sea breeze. "The wedding's being broadcasted," he said. "The company partnered with the Veterans Fund. It's not just a ceremony, it's the launch of the Phoenix Project." The words took a moment to sink in. My chest rose with a shallow breath. "You didn't tell me that. I wanted to surprise you." Surprise. I almost smiled at the irony. Part of me felt pride. What we had built together was finally being seen. But another part of me tightened at the thought of cameras, headlines, strangers watching every second. So this wasn't just a wedding. It was a stage, a declaration. And if April wanted to humiliate me, she'd just been given a much larger audience. Outside, the faint buzz of phones rose like static. Rosa was standing by the door, arms crossed, her phone screen glowing blue in the dim light. Her expression darkened as she read something, then turned toward me. "You're not going to like this," she said, walking closer. She handed me the phone. The tweet was already spreading fast. "Guess she's marrying a man who doesn't even know who she really is." The words burned cold. They were designed to... Rosa swore under her breath, fingers flying over the screen. "I'm going to report it. Don't." I reached out and stopped her. "Silence will hurt her more." She froze, then nodded once. She knew me well enough not to argue when I'd switched into command mode. I set the phone down on the vanity table. Face up. The tweet still glowing faintly in the reflection of the mirror. Let her talk. Let her fill the air with noise. I'd learned long ago that truth didn't need to shout to be heard. I rose from the chair, smoothing the front of my dress, and caught my reflection again. The woman in the mirror looked calm, but her eyes carried something cold and deliberate beneath the calm. A readiness. In the Air Force, we learned that turbulence only tests structure integrity, I murmured. Nathaniel's gaze softened, the corners of his mouth curving just slightly. Then, let's show them you're built to last. He extended his hand. I hesitated for half a heartbeat, then placed mine in his. His palm was warm, steady, an anchor in the shifting air. Outside, the music changed. The first chords of the string quartet drifted through the half-open window, blending with the sound of the wind over the bay. Rosa gave a small nod toward the door. It's time. Nathaniel and I walked side by side toward the light spilling from the garden. The hallway narrowed as we approached the exit, sunlight cutting through in thin lines, bright and unforgiving. I felt the weight of every eye waiting beyond that doorway, the guests, the cameras, the whispers. And somewhere, thousands of miles away, April, watching and hoping for cracks. My hand tightened around Nathaniel's as we stepped through the threshold. The light hit us hard, flooding the corridor, wrapping us in a glow so bright it blurred the edges between his shadow and mine. For the first time all morning, I didn't feel alone. Whatever came next, whispers, headlines, betrayals, it would meet a woman who'd already survived worse. And if April wanted a spectacle, she was about to get one, just not the one she expected. The first notes of the violin floated across the garden, thin and pure against the hum of the waves from Puget Sound. The sky had cleared just enough for light to catch on the wet stone path, glimmering like tiny shards of glass. The air carried the sharp scent of salt and lilies. I stood at the edge of the aisle, facing the rows of white chairs that stretched toward the altar. Every seat was filled, every eye waiting. There was no father to take my arm, no mother fussing over my veil, no sister whispering encouragement from the side. The space beside me was empty, and the absence spoke louder than any music. Rosa stood close, her hand brushing mine for a brief second before letting go. Her voice, low and steady, found me through the music. You walk this one alone, Captain. I met her gaze, the hint of a smile tugging at my mouth. I've walked worse fields. And I had. The air tightened around me as I took my first step forward. The hem of my dress skimmed the damp bricks, trailing behind me like a ripple of white smoke. Every footfall was deliberate, slow, precise. My breath fell into rhythm with the strings and the tide. Heads began to turn. The whispers followed, soft, sharp, and human. Some held sympathy, others curiosity. A few were already forming opinions. I felt them like wind against my skin, invisible but undeniable. Somewhere, cameras adjusted their lenses. I could sense the movement of the broadcast crew, the quiet excitement of people who live for a story. Rosa's voice came again, almost a whisper. Hold formation, eyes forward. I didn't nod, but I obeyed. My chin lifted, the way I'd been trained to in uniform. My posture was my armor, my silence, my salute. Halfway down the aisle, a flicker of movement caught my eye. One of the technicians leaned toward the master of ceremonies, murmuring urgently. The music didn't stop, but the shift in energy spread like static. The MC's face twitched, then smoothed again. Someone's commenting live. It's going viral, the technician said, too low for most to hear. On the massive LED screen beside the reception tent, a new comment appeared under the Seattle Herald live stream. April Cooper TX. Fake family, fake bride. Money talks louder than vows. For one breath, the entire event tilted. Murmurs swept through the audience like a gust through leaves. A few heads turned toward Nathaniel. Others craned to see the screen again. The phalanx of photographers caught the tension like blood in the water. I stopped for exactly one heartbeat. The world seemed to wait for a reaction. At least she's watching. I murmured under my breath, soft enough that only Rosa, somewhere behind me, could hear. And then I took the next step. The cameras zoomed in, and for a moment, the only thing filling the screen was my face. Composed, unflinching, the faint light of defiance in my eyes. I didn't need to speak. My stillness said everything. Impatience stirred among the press row. A few whispered to each other. The music held, the notes trembling between grace and tension. Every second stretched like a test. When I reached the altar, Nathaniel stepped forward. His hand found mine, firm and grounding. He turned to the nearest camera, his voice calm, clear, resonant. "No words can define what honor looks like," he said. "You're looking at it." The crowd stilled. The ocean hushed. Even the wind seemed to fold itself into silence. The director caught the moment instantly, switching the live feed to a close-up shot of us, his hand around mine, the light catching on the ring waiting to be exchanged. Across Washington, viewers saw not a scandal, but a statement. Somewhere an audience of strangers started to cheer. And far away, in a Paris lounge lit by gold chandeliers, my sister was watching too. April sat between my parents at a small marble table, a glass of red wine in her hand. The broadcast was on every screen in the room, the captions translating Nathaniel's words in real time. When her comment flashed across the feed, she had laughed, a quick, sharp sound. But when Nathaniel spoke, the laughter stopped. My father leaned closer to the television, voice low. "That's our daughter." April's jaw tightened. "No. That's her performance." She lifted her glass too quickly, and the wine spilled across the linen, dark red blooming over the white cloth. My mother flinched as it spread, the stain seeping like blood beneath April's hand. No one spoke after that. The screen continued to glow, reflected in their glasses. Back in Seattle, the ceremony moved forward. The priest's voice rose above the murmur of the bay. "Do you, Darlene Cooper, take Nathaniel Brooks?" I lifted my head. The words came out steady, each one deliberate. "I do. Because family isn't who shows up, it's who stays when it's hardest." A ripple of silence passed over the crowd. Then, one by one, people began to applaud. It wasn't loud, not at first, just a few claps, then more, until the sound became a wave, rolling across the garden. On the live broadcast, the comment section filled with messages, support, respect, even admiration. To stand with Darlene, extra strength in silence. The same audience that had pitied me moments before now looked at me differently, not as a victim, but as someone who refused to bow to humiliation. Nathaniel smiled, small but proud. His thumb brushed the back of my hand, anchoring me in the moment. I didn't look at the cameras. I didn't need to. My gaze stayed on him, and beyond him. The horizon, clear and endless. When the priest blessed the rings, sunlight broke through the clouds at last. The beam was sharp and sudden, scattering diamonds across the surface of the sound. The audience gasped as if on cue. Rosa, standing just behind the last row, whispered under her breath, "That's your spotlight, Captain." I let a faint smile touch my lips. "No, that's my silence." Finally seen. Nathaniel slipped the ring onto my finger, and the crowd rose in a standing ovation. Somewhere above us, a plane roared faintly through the clouds, the sound of departure, of distance, of something greater moving forward. The ceremony closed with applause, but I didn't hear it as noise. I heard it as release, the sound of years of being overlooked finally breaking into recognition. In that instant, under the Seattle sun, surrounded by people who'd once doubted me, I stood taller than I ever had. Across an ocean, my sister watched, her glass of wine still trembling in her hand. And though she couldn't see my face anymore, she must have known it too. The silence she'd always mistaken for weakness had just become the loudest thing in the room. 2 hours after the ceremony, Seattle was glowing in the kind of late afternoon light that makes everything look cleaner than it really is. The city skyline shimmered against the sound, every rooftop gleaming like the world itself had decided to forgive me. But it wasn't forgiveness. It was fascination. Across every major outlet, headlines pulsed in bold letters. Air Force engineer marries aviation CEO, a symbol of grace under fire. The story had taken on a life of its own. Commentators praised me for composure, for restraint, for turning humiliation into dignity. News anchors used words like poise and strength. On social media, the hashtags swelled into waves. Stand like Darlene. Silence is power. The cruel comments that had filled my screen only hours ago were gone. buried under messages of support from strangers who believed they had seen something pure. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, still wearing my wedding dress, the skirt spilling around me like a white tide. A glass of champagne fizzed in my hand. The sound was soft, constant, the way calm always sounds after a storm. Nathaniel came up behind me, his reflection appearing in the window before his voice reached me. "You changed more minds today than any campaign ever could?" I smiled faintly, watching the bubbles rise and break. I didn't speak a word. "Exactly," he said, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. "We didn't talk after that. We didn't need to." The silence between us wasn't heavy. It was earned. The phone buzzed on the nightstand, cutting through the quiet. I almost ignored it, but the name flashing on the screen made my chest tighten. "Mom!" I answered. The screen lit up with 3 faces in a single frame. My parents, sitting stiff and uncomfortable in the dim light of a Paris apartment. And April, lounging back in her chair, eyes gleaming with something between triumph and venom. "You think you won, don't you?" she said, her tone slick with confidence. "We saw your show." I held the phone steady, my reflection flickering faintly over her face. "If it was a show, you were the audience. Hope you enjoyed it." Before she could answer, I ended the call. The sound cut off with a click that felt cleaner than any argument. For a second, the screen went black, and in that darkness, I saw my mother's face as the image froze in my mind, her tears falling silently as she set the phone down. The look of realization, maybe regret, the quiet collapse of someone who'd finally run out of excuses. Outside the window, the first drops of rain began to fall, tracing streaks across the glass. Nathaniel moved closer, but I didn't turn. The city's lights blurred through the raindrops, smearing into gold and white ribbons across the glass. The next day, the news cycle evolved again. Reporters from the Seattle Herald broke a new headline. Anonymous source from Paris tried to sabotage Cooper Brooks' wedding. The details followed fast. An anonymous email traced back to a luxury hotel in the 8th arrondissement of Paris. A familiar IP address. A statement from the editor confirming that false materials had been sent in an attempt to defame both me and the Phoenix Project. They didn't say April's name, but they didn't need to. The internet did it for them. Within hours, the same accounts that had once mocked me now tore into her. Screenshots of her comments flooded timelines. April, Cooper Exposed trended across platforms. My family's name was back in the headlines, but for once, I wasn't the one burning under the light. I didn't smile. There was no satisfaction in watching her destroy herself. It was just gravity, finally doing its work. Somewhere in Paris, she was watching too, that evening, in the mirrored glass of a hotel bar. April's reflection looked less certain than it had the night before. The TV above the counter replayed clips from the wedding broadcast. Nathaniel's words echoing, "No words can define what honor looks like." "You're looking at it." She slammed her drink down. The ice cracked. She turned toward my parents, her voice rising. "She made me the villain." My father sighed. Old and tired. "You'll only make it worse." "No," she snapped, grabbing her phone off the table. "I'll fix the story." Before anyone could stop her, she was out the door. Hours later, the glow of the departure board at Charles de Gaulle reflected off her face as she stared at the flight bound for Seattle. The camera of someone's phone caught her silhouette walking toward the gate, eyes burning, lips pressed tight, the red from a nearby warning light flashing across her features like a prophecy. By the time her plane lifted off the runway, the rain had begun to fall there too. Back in Seattle, the storm gathered its own momentum. That night, I sat beside Nathaniel in our hotel suite, both of us facing the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city. The lights spread out beneath us like a constellation built by human hands. My shoes were off, the wedding dress draped carelessly across the chair. Outside, the rain had turned steady, whispering against the glass like static. "They'll try again," Nathaniel said quietly. "Then they'll learn silence can echo too," I replied. He looked at me, and for a moment, the reflection of the city flickered across both our faces. The same light, the same stillness. There was nothing else to say. The storm outside was building, and I could already feel its weight pressing somewhere far across the ocean. But for now, in this moment, the world was quiet. The air smelled faintly of rain and champagne. Somewhere below, A car horn echoed, brief and distant. I closed my eyes and let the sound fade. Peace. I'd learned. Doesn't mean the battle's over. Sometimes it's just the breath you take before the next one begins. The rain thickened, sliding down the glass in silver lines. I rested my head against the cool surface and whispered to myself, not a vow this time, but a simple truth. Silence isn't surrender, it's aim. And when the time came, they would hear it, every single one of them. 3 weeks after the wedding, Seattle had turned the color of steel. The sky hung low, the kind of gray that promised rain even when it wasn't falling yet. Autumn had arrived quietly, chilling the air and washing the city in silver light. The world had moved on from my wedding, or at least it pretended to, but headlines still surfaced every few days. Old photos, new speculation. The word grace repeated until it lost meaning. I spent most of my days at the Phoenix Project, the training center Rosa and I had built for women veterans who wanted to return to technical work. The air there was honest, clean with the smell of oil and metal, the sound of tools clicking against steel. It was the only place that made sense anymore. That morning, while I was showing a group of trainees how to calibrate an engine mount, Rosa stepped into the hangar doorway, her expression tight. The rain had started outside, soft but steady, drumming on the roof. She didn't have to say anything. I could tell from the look in her eyes. She's back, I said quietly. Rosa nodded. The news had already exploded online. The sister behind the scandal returns to defend herself. Reporters swarmed the streets, waiting for the next spectacle. I didn't bother to read the articles. For once, I didn't need to run from what was coming. By noon, the black SUV appeared at the gate. The sound of tires against gravel broke through the rhythm of the workshop. I looked up and saw her, April, stepping out with the sharpness of someone who'd been rehearsing an entrance. A long beige coat, sunglasses despite the clouds, and behind her, my parents. Their posture told the story before anyone spoke. My father rigid, my mother small and trembling. Then came the press. Cameras, microphones, the hiss of umbrellas opening against the drizzle. April's voice cut through the noise. You lied to everyone! You're not the hero they think you are! Rosa was the first to move. She strode toward the gate, shoulders squared, the authority of her old rank still in every motion. This is a restricted facility, ma'am. Step back. But April didn't stop. Her voice sharpened, desperate to climb over the rain. I stepped out from the hangar, the sound of my boots echoing off the concrete. The crowd parted slightly as the cameras found me. What do you want, April? She laughed, a high, hollow sound that didn't reach her eyes. The truth. The air held still for a beat, just the sound of shutters clicking. Then she pulled something from her coat pocket, a small flash drive sealed in plastic. She held it up like a trophy. This, she said to the reporters, contains proof that she stole the design for the Phoenix Project from our father's old company. Gasps spread through the crowd. Questions flew like bullets. My mother looked stricken. My father stared at the ground, unmoving. I didn't blink. You sure you want to play this game, April? You played first, she snapped, voice cracking. The wind shifted, carrying her words down the driveway, where Nathaniel's car had just turned in. He stepped out before the driver even opened the door, followed by 2 of his legal advisors and a security officer. His expression was calm, the kind of calm that scares people who expect chaos. Before you accuse my wife, maybe you should see this. He raised a small remote, and the LED screen by the front gate flickered to life. Rain speckled the glass as an image appeared. A dim hallway, a security camera angle, a woman in a long coat glancing around before inserting a drive into a computer. The timestamp flashed. 2 days before our wedding. The footage zoomed closer. April's face, clear as daylight. Her own reflection caught in the monitor as she downloaded files. A wave of voices broke through the stunned silence. Reporters whispering, lenses focusing, microphones extending forward. My mother's hand went to her mouth. My father finally looked up, but the disappointment in his eyes was too late to matter. April took a step back, her voice a faint rasp. You set me up. No, I said quietly. You did that yourself. She turned wildly toward my parents. Tell them she's lying. But they didn't. My mother was crying now, her mascara running. My father just turned away. The first crack of thunder rolled through the air, followed by the hard sound of rain pelting the pavement. Cameras clicked relentlessly, capturing everything: the downfall, the tears, the wreckage. April stood in the middle of it, soaked, her coat clinging to her body. Makeup streaked down her cheeks. The flash from the cameras turned the raindrops into sparks around her. She screamed, her voice tearing through the storm. "You think you're better than me?" I looked at her, tired, heart steady, and said softly, "I just stopped needing you." The words hung there, swallowed by the rain. Reporters swarmed, turning their lenses toward her now. The same crowd that once pitied me now looked at her with hunger. My mother reached for her, but April pulled away, face twisted with disbelief. And then she was alone. I walked back toward the hangar, the sound of Rosa's boots falling into step beside mine. "Behind us," Nathaniel spoke to the press, his tone measured and final. The truth was no longer a secret, it was proof. Inside the gate, the noise dimmed. My breath came slow, controlled. The rain drummed harder against the roof, filling the space where shouts had been. In the military, we learned that battles aren't won by noise, they're won by precision. I looked up through the glass ceiling as a plane crossed overhead, its lights blinking against the gray. The reflection shimmered across the wet concrete at my feet. I stood there a long time, rain sliding down my face, the sound of victory quieter than anyone expected. Steady, disciplined, and absolute. By morning, the storm had shifted from the sky to the news. Seattle woke to headlines splashed across every major network. Sister of Air Force engineer caught leaking corporate files. The story ran on a loop, video clips of April's public breakdown, screenshots of her posts, stills of her mascara streaking in the rain. Within hours, she lost her job. Corporate statements followed. Formal, sterile, apologetic to everyone but her. The investigation had already begun. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. Justice had moved on its own for once, clean and quiet. But no storm hits one person alone. My parents' names appeared beneath hers in every article. Quotes from old interviews, photos from better times. Comment sections tore them apart for enabling her, for raising the entitled sister who couldn't stand in her own shadow. The phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Missed calls stacked like dominoes. 200 by noon. Messages from journalists, colleagues, distant relatives, even strangers. Everyone wanted a reaction. Rosa was sprawled on the couch across my office, boots up, flipping through channels that all said the same thing. She finally muted the screen and glanced over. "You gonna answer any of those?" I turned the phone face down on the desk. The vibrations rattled against the wood for another few seconds before I silenced it completely. "Silence got me here," I said softly. "Silence will finish this." Rosa studied me for a moment, then nodded once. She didn't argue. She never did when she knew I'd already chosen my ground. By late afternoon, an envelope arrived. Thin, off-white, with my mother's handwriting slanted neatly across the front. I knew that cursive from years of grocery lists and birthday cards, from the same gentle pressure that had written excuses for April all her life. I opened it slowly. "We're sorry for choosing wrong, Darlene. But please, don't let them take your sister away. No apology, just fear of consequence." I folded the letter once, then again, and set it aside without responding. They weren't sorry because I'd been hurt. They were sorry because they'd been exposed. There's a difference, and I'd spent too long pretending not to see it. Outside, the sky darkened into the gray-blue haze that always came before another drizzle. The hum of traffic echoed faintly through the industrial district. I watched the first raindrops hit the glass and thought of all the times I'd stayed silent to keep peace in a house that didn't know the meaning of it. This silence was different. It wasn't surrender, it was ownership. By evening, the media had moved on from scandal to symbolism. I had become a headline of my own. The quiet veteran, Darlene Cooper's lesson in dignity. Anchors dissected my restraint. Commentators debated whether I had planned my silence as strategy. They spoke about me like a brand, something to label and market. The same people who once waited for me to break were now quoting my stillness like scripture. Nathaniel stood by the window of our apartment, the glow from the television flickering across his face. He turned to me with a half smile. "Your silence has gone national. Let's use it right," I said. And we did. The following week, we reopened the Phoenix Project, not just as a training center, but as a symbol of what comes after endurance. Funding poured in from veteran support programs. Rosa and I expanded operations into 2 new facilities, one in Spokane and another in Colorado Springs. Every woman who walked through those doors carried her own version of silence, grief, shame, survival. We taught them not how to forget, but how to rebuild, how to turn precision into pride again. One afternoon, a young trainee lingered after class, wiping grease from her hands. She looked at me with a mix of curiosity and hesitation. "Why did you name it Phoenix?" "Because sometimes you have to burn before you fly," I said. She smiled, understanding more than she needed to ask. The room quieted after she left, filled only with the low hum of machines cooling down. I walked to the window overlooking the tarmac behind the hangar. The sun was setting, and a group of students was testing an engine calibration. The sound was rhythmic, controlled, alive. I thought of April then, not with anger, not with longing, just the faint ache of recognition that some people never learn the difference between noise and truth. Night settled over the city, pressing softly against the glass. The lights from the runway blinked in measured intervals, guiding training planes as they rose into the clouds. I stayed there long after the others had gone, my reflection floating faintly in the window. "Forgiveness isn't mandatory," I whispered. "Peace is." I turned off the lights, leaving only the glow from the runway to fill the room. Engines roared in the distance, fading higher into the mist. Each one carried the same sound I'd learned to trust, a steady, growing hum that meant something was moving forward. I wasn't watching for them to return anymore. I was watching them rise. 3 years passed quietly, the way years do when you've stopped waiting for storms. Seattle's skyline gleamed under a soft morning light, its glass buildings reflecting a calm sky that finally seemed to match my own. I stood inside the testing hangar at Boeing Field, clipboard in hand, listening to the hum of turbines warming up. The air smelled of jet fuel and coffee, the familiar scent of industry and promise. This place was my home now. The new engine test program had become my responsibility, a role that demanded the same discipline that once kept me alive in a cockpit. Around me, engineers and interns hurried across the floor, their safety vests bright against the metallic walls. Most of them were women. Many had once been trainees at the Phoenix Project, the same women who had walked through the doors of a small hangar 3 years ago, uncertain and bruised by life, just as I once was. Now they worked beside me, sharp and confident, laughter echoing between the roar of machines. The rhythm of their voices was stronger than any headline. I adjusted the collar of my lab coat, feeling the weight of the badge clipped to it. Chief Systems Engineer, Field Operations. The title had never been the goal, but it fit like something finally earned. The engines idled low, vibrating through the concrete beneath my boots. I reached for the pressure readout, scanning the numbers that flickered green. Behind me, the door opened. Nathaniel's reflection appeared first on the polished window of the test chamber. Then his voice followed, deep and familiar. "Ready for your next flight, Commander?" "Always," I said, glancing up at him. He smiled, the kind that didn't need words, and stepped beside me as the turbines began their first full rotation. The sound filled the hangar, a thunder contained, powerful but controlled. My heart beat in sync with it. I could feel the vibration through the soles of my boots, steady and alive. The students gathered behind the glass of the observation room, waiting for instruction. Their faces glowed under the light of the control panels. I lifted the intercom and pressed the button. My voice carried through the static. "Sometimes you need turbulence to reach altitude," I told them. "It's not failure, it's lift." They smiled, and I saw myself in their expressions, years younger, still learning that strength could be quiet, that composure could be louder than defiance. One of them, a tall woman with dark hair pulled back into a bun, raised her hand. "Do you ever think about your family?" she asked, half shy, half curious. I paused, letting the hum of the engines fill the space before I answered. "They left for Paris to escape me, but I learned to fly without them." The words came easily this time. No bitterness, no ache, just truth, smoothed by time. The young woman nodded slowly, her expression softening, understanding more than she could probably explain. Nathaniel watched me, a small, proud smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. You could tell he wanted to say something, but he didn't. He knew better than to interrupt a woman who'd learned how to own her silence. The lead pilot radioed from the runway, voice crisp and confident. "Clearance given. We're ready for takeoff." "Copy that," I said into the mic. "Proceed when ready." The hangar doors rumbled open, sunlight flooding in like liquid gold. The jet shimmered in the light, sleek, silver, alive. As it began to taxi forward, the reflection glinted off the polished steel walls, scattering the light across my face. Engines roared higher, a sound that reached into my chest and stayed there. The wheels lifted from the tarmac. A surge of wind rushed through the hangar, brushing against my coat and stirring the loose strands of hair at my neck. The plane climbed steadily, its wings cutting clean through the air. The team erupted into cheers, but I stayed still, watching as it rose higher and higher until it pierced the edge of the clouds. The roar faded into a hum, then into something softer, like the heartbeat of the sky itself. For a moment, I saw my own reflection in the glass. The woman staring back wasn't the soldier, or the daughter, or the bride the world once debated about. She was just a person. Steady, self-contained, free. Peace, I thought, doesn't arrive all at once. It builds quietly, layer by layer, until you wake one morning and realize the silence you once feared has become your home. Nathaniel stepped closer, his hand brushing mine. The engine's rumble faded to a soft vibration underfoot. Outside, the clouds broke open, spilling sunlight across the bay. The team around us began to disperse, logging data, exchanging notes, their laughter echoing down the hall. I stayed by the window, watching the jet's contrail stretch across the horizon, a perfect white line dissolving into blue. Forgiveness had never come, but peace had, and that was enough. I whispered it softly, more to myself than anyone else. Sometimes, you have to lose everything that grounds you to remember how to fly. The sky shimmered as the plane climbed out of sight. In its wake, there was only the sound of the wind, the rhythmic pulse of the engines fading higher into the distance, and the steady beat of my own heart keeping time beneath it. The woman who had once been left behind was now standing exactly where she belonged, beneath the open sky, listening to the quiet, beautiful sound above the clouds.